Hi, this is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. Today's video is about trauma, power, and the appeal of victimhood. So one thing that I've noticed over time is that when you work with people who have been through what they deem to be traumatic events, it's not what happened in and of itself, but it's the meaning that people make out of it, the story they generate about what this means, and more specifically, what this means about them, that turns into the actual problem. Now, the very tricky thing with traumatic incidents and experiences is that when people feel a sense of powerlessness, a sense of hopelessness, and a sense of helplessness, and a lot of chaos, they want to regain that sense of agency, that sense of having power or hope or being able to master something. That's only natural. And here is where the appeal of victimhood comes in. Now, let me make a very basic distinction. There's a distinction to be made between being victimized and a victim identity. It's the victim identity that's the issue. There's a lot of people who have been severely victimized in life and who don't have a victim identity. There's also a lot of people who haven't really experienced anything out of the ordinary, but they have a very strong victim identity. So it's that. So someone can victimize you, do something to you, which may not be in your power to do much about. Whether that might be a drunken driver that runs you over, or an assassin that shoots you, or a mugging, or a rape, or a vindictive boss, or a colleague that takes credit for your work, or something like that. It's very possible to be, or maybe you get sent to prison for a crime you haven't done, something like that. But it's the victim identity that we can easily make out of things that becomes a problem over time. Now, here's the big appeal when it comes to victimhood. The victim identity gives us often a lot of power. If you have a victim identity, you can have a lot of power over compassionate people, because they will, in an effort to help you and take care of you, begin to cater to your every whim due to fear of your mental health deteriorating, or you being offended, or being hurt. So quite often you can see people who have a victim identity who satisfy that perceived need for power by using their victimhood identity to control compassionate people to do what they want. And there's a lot of power in that. You can sometimes see people with victim identities control families, family systems. They might control their therapists. They might control public discourse. If you're just victimized enough, then, and you're angry enough, then a lot of people, some out of cowardice, some out of compassion, will no longer speak their mind, or no longer challenge you on anything. So the victimhood identity gives the traumatized person a sense of power and a sense of being in control. It's a pseudo power though, and that's the really tricky thing, because it's completely dependent upon others. And this is why people who have a victim identity engage in so much rage. You know, these rage outbursts that you see. Because if I fundamentally misunderstand where my experience is coming from, if I hold you accountable for my emotional state, and you don't act the way I want you to act, that's enraging because I feel completely out of control. And the only way I know then to kind of get a sense of power and agency is to rage. And if raging works, that's one way of trying to satisfy my perceived need for being significant and for having agency and for having some power. You know, another tricky thing with victimhood is that not only does it give you often a sense of power and a sense of control, it can give us a sense of significance, you know, because if we can't achieve or perform or deliver, if we have an external frame of reference, or live up to our own standards, you know, ethically, we can always achieve a perceived need for significance, being important, by being the biggest victim, by being the one who has the big problem that never gets solved. So I can become very important and significant by going to therapist after therapist with a big problem that never gets solved. That can then become my claim to being special. Another thing that it does is that victimhood identity gives me a perceived sense of order. Because in a chaotic world, there are unwritten social rules for how to treat someone who's suffering psychologically. People have a tendency to either become very compassionate and to give you what you want and to cater to every whim, or they avoid you, or they set clear boundaries. So having that victimhood thing going on, when people comply to it, gives you a sense of order, a sense of stability, a sense of significance, and a sense of power. But it's, as I said, it's pseudo power. It's a bit like alcohol. I view victimhood identity as a drug, a bit like alcohol. The thing with alcohol for many is that it works in a kind of paradoxical way. And that is that the more some people drink, the more in control and certain they feel, but the less competent they actually are. They may be more confident about getting behind the wheel of a car or winning a fist fight, but the degree of competency, the feeling of certainty and confidence, it's a pseudo-confidence, has a tendency to be directly proportional to the diminishment in your actual ability to fight or to drive a car. You know, and victimhood kind of works in the same way, which is why it's self-perpetuating, because it doesn't really work. And then we increase the rage and the victimhood tendencies in an attempt to be significant and to have power and control and to have an orderly world. There are a lot of benefits to the victimhood identity, you know. So for example, one big benefit is that you always have a free pass for your own bad behavior. It doesn't matter how bad you behave. If you have the victim identity, you have a free pass because the other person is supposed to be compassionate no matter what and to understand the depths of your pain. And if they don't, then they are an awful human being and they're gaslighting or victimizing you. So victims always become hypocrites. They end up with one set of ethical standards for others, while they simultaneously give themselves a free pass. Now, of course, if anyone ever points that out, they're gonna rage, you know. Um, you're also off the hook because you're never accountable. And seeing yourself as a victim too becomes a way of kind of bolstering a pseudo self-esteem because you get to see yourself as all good. If you have a victim identity, then you're nudging your brain to see other people as either people who can um, verify or affirm your worth as a person, or who somehow oppress you and victimizes you. So it becomes a very black and white way of thinking where you objectify other people. They become tools to affirm you or who can threaten you. And by being the victim, you get to be all good while other people get to be all bad. And that's a very lucrative, it's a very psychologically tempting position to be in. But it doesn't work. It doesn't really work. It's a bit like the people who play video games or do gaming, and they create these virtual lives on the internet where they get some of their perceived needs met in a kind of pseudo way. You know, you have friendships without real investments. You have relationships without real risk. And that's the big price to pay, because if you're all good and you have a free pass, you're going to get stupid. You're going to become a person who's not self-reflective, not psychologically oriented, and it's going to stunt your growth. And that's ultimately not a good thing. So if you're gonna go and do change work with people, it's often smart to get a commitment from the client to overcome their victimhood identity and to team up with them and to help them realize that to grow as a person, they're going to have to give up that particular identity. Of course, a lot of it you can also help by having the client discover the nature of their own experience, by helping them to begin to see that it's not the events themselves or what happened, but it's their own thinking, it's their own meaning making, their own interpretations about what's happening, the stories they're generating about what this means about the world and people and right or wrong and who they fundamentally are. That's the main aspect of their suffering. And of course, the more they kind of see that their experience is generating within them and doesn't directly come from people and events, the more you pull the rug out of the victimhood. I sometimes, one way I can often see if a client has a lot of this victimhood going on is when they call on the phone and I ask them questions and they just go back to telling their story. And even if I kind of remind them that, look, you didn't really answer my question was this, if they don't alter their course, if they just go back to their story, that's often a sign. And people with a lot of victimhood identity going on usually insist that you spend a lot of time talking about their past and exploring their past. Of course, one thing you can do is to help people discover that what you call a past experientially is really a thought occurring right now. That's one way out of it. But before we've done that, I often warn clients about the safe past, the preoccupation with the safe, dead past, because life is lived now. And a preoccupation with the safe past often gets in the way or helps distract people from dealing with what they don't want to look at in their life right now. So if you have a tendency to really cling to your past and your past stories, it's very safe, it's very predictable, and it's often a sign that we're reluctant to take a look at what's actually going on in our lived life in the present moment. This victimhood identity can be so alluring. You see it a lot these days. And I've mentioned this before in videos, but if you look at people who fell for the whole repressed memory scandal, you know, like let's say you have a person, they're in their late 20s, female, a bit narcissistic, a bit entitled, you know, a kind of addiction to being special and getting approval and having power and stuff like that. If let's say that their lives haven't quite panned out the way they had hoped, it's really nice to be able to discover repressed memories of abuse in therapy and to put all of that in that basket, to be able to say, look, my life could have been wonderful. I'm really amazing. I'm really, really smart. It's just that particular thing that someone else did that just fucked everything up. And as a result, they get to see themselves as all good. It's a bit like the clients I see who insist on calling their ex-partners or people around them for narcissists and psychopaths. Some of those people may have a lot of those tendencies. That might be true. But there's often also a tendency in that if they can project those qualities of being all bad and super charming and super persuasive onto the other person, then they get to be complete victim. They couldn't have done anything different. You know, they're pure love. You know, they're in the rights. So this is tempting. And in my experience, a lot of good change work comes down to helping people, realize where their experience is actually coming from, that it's generated within them, having good boundaries, and to the extent that they can't quite see that, a commitment to overcoming that particular victim identity. So I hope this was useful. If you like my ways of thinking, know that I do mentoring. I see clients from people all over the world on Skype. You can reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. I have a seminar coming up March 19th and 20th. It's called No Self, No Problem. It goes into how seeing through the illusory nature of the self can have a lot of practical applications for change work. So if you're curious about exploring that, Pete Dalton in Birmingham is promoting it. It's an online seminar. The website is ayetherandalchemy.net. I'll create a link below this video so that you can see it. Anyways, till next time, thanks for listening.